Some time ago, dungeons had begun appearing all over the world without any warning or explanation. Inside these dungeons, a new kind of resource was discovered, a material called magic stones. These stones quickly became highly valued across the entire world, and their importance grew rapidly. Eventually, governments and authorities stepped in and established laws and regulations around dungeon access. A specific qualification became mandatory for anyone who wished to enter a dungeon, and that qualification was the title of adventurer. Among all adventurers, the highest possible rank was SSS, and in all of Japan, there was only one person who had reached that level. On a particular night, everything had been arranged perfectly. A top-class restaurant had been reserved entirely for one purpose. There was a breathtaking night view visible through the windows, a carefully chosen bouquet of roses on the table, and a ring. The young man sitting there looked at everything he had set up and said quietly to himself that yes, it was perfect. His name was Harukaze Reito. He had first become an adventurer during his first year of high school, but it had taken him many years of hard and dangerous work to reach the point he was at now. The magic stones that adventurers collected from dungeons were never easy to obtain. Getting one's hands on them always meant standing face to face with the possibility of death. But because the dungeons were managed and overseen by the government, the rewards for completing runs were reliable and substantial enough to build a life around. And that was exactly what Reito had done. Ever since he had met a woman named Kaori, Reito had pushed himself even harder than before. He had driven himself to earn more money, motivated entirely by the desire to ensure that she would never have to worry about anything because of him. She had always been there to support him. When he had defeated his first truly powerful monster, she had been just as happy about it as though the achievement had been her own. That had meant everything to him. On top of his adventuring work, Reito had also taken the time to study investment, building his financial knowledge alongside his combat experience. After years of effort, he had finally reached the point where he had earned enough. All of that hard work was on the verge of paying off in the way he had always imagined. His heart was pounding as he sat at that table. His plan was to retire from adventuring entirely and spend the rest of his life living quietly and peacefully alongside Kaori. The proposal he was about to make was the first step toward that dream. Kaori arrived. Reito greeted her with warmth and relief and invited her to sit down. Kaori looked around at the restaurant and remarked that it was a lovely place. Reito told her that he had chosen the best possible venue for what today meant to him. Kaori, looking around, said casually that being invited somewhere like this could only mean one thing, that it was likely a proposal. Reito confirmed that it was exactly that. He began to speak, acknowledging that the timing might seem unusual, but before he could finish expressing what he had prepared to say, Kaori told him to stop. What followed shattered everything Reito had been building toward. Kaori told him directly and without softening it that there was no way she would ever marry someone like him. Reito sat frozen in shock, unable to process what he had just heard. Kaori continued, asking him why he looked so stunned, as though the answer should have been obvious to him all along. She pointed out that being an adventurer was an unstable and dangerous profession, and that she could not imagine tying her life to someone in that line of work. She said he pushed himself far too hard, and that their relationship had always felt like a burden she carried quietly. She brought up the fact that their dates had always been cheap and lacking in any real style or effort, and she admitted that she had been quietly dissatisfied with things for a long time. Reito sat there not knowing what to say or do. He told her he had not known she felt that way, and reminded her that she had never said any of this to him before. He also pointed out that she had just said the restaurant was lovely only moments ago. Kaori raised her voice and told him to stop. At that moment, another man walked in through the entrance. He addressed Reito directly, telling him that persistent men were not well received. He explained that he had been waiting for Kaori outside, but had grown concerned and decided to come in. Kaori immediately moved toward the man, whose name was Katsuki, and embraced him. She turned back to Reito and introduced Katsuki as an elite staff member of the Adventurers Guild. She described him as someone completely different from Reito, a man who took her to proper places and had already proposed to her. Reito felt the word proposal hit him like a physical blow. Katsuki looked at him with a smirk and said that as a guild staff member, he could not ignore the fact that someone like Reito was operating as an adventurer. He demanded to see Reito's adventurer's license, right there and right then, telling him that he intended to erase his registration on the spot. Reito went still. His mind was trying to make sense of everything happening around him at once. He had wanted to leave adventuring behind, to walk away from the danger and build something quiet and safe with Kaori. He had believed she wanted the same thing. The realization that he had been the only one who wanted that settled over him heavily. He clenched his fist. Everything inside him refused to accept what was happening. But then he thought of Kaori's smile. As much as it tore at him, he found himself hesitating and then slowly reaching into his pocket. He told himself that no matter how much it hurt, what mattered more was her happiness. He handed Katsuki his license. Katsuki expressed mild surprise at how easily Reito had given it over, saying it made things simpler. Reito thought to himself that he had already been planning to retire from adventuring anyway. He would find a way to start again from nothing. There was a brief pause, and then Katsuki announced that the registration had been erased. He dropped the license onto the floor without any care, and he and Kaori walked away together. As they left, Katsuki quietly told Reito that he was now officially unemployed. The restaurant staff had been watching all of this unfold, and they were visibly concerned when they noticed that Reito had begun to laugh. It was not a happy laugh. Reito muttered to himself that he had just been rejected and that people were welcome to laugh at him. He then addressed the entire room, telling everyone present, the manager, the chef, the waitstaff, all of them, that they should drink together. He announced that he intended to drink away his sorrows and invited everyone to join him. One of the waiters responded with quiet professionalism and said he would bring out the very best wine the restaurant had to offer. Reito raised what would become his first glass of the night and offered a toast, directing it at his own pitiful situation, having lost both his career and the woman he loved in the same evening. The following day, a woman came to the guild master with urgent news. The adventurer registration of the SSS-ranked adventurer known as Zero, whose real name was Harukaze Reito, had been deleted. The guild master told her to stay calm and mentioned that he had already checked the list himself and confirmed it. He asked her whether anyone knew who had authorized Zero's retirement. She told him that no one knew yet and that they were currently looking into it. She expressed hope that it was simply some kind of error or misunderstanding. But the situation was even more serious than just the deleted registration. The clan that Reito had led, known as the Twilight Tea Party, had also been disbanded. The guild master was genuinely taken aback and could not understand why any of this had happened so suddenly. In a meeting room elsewhere, the members of the Twilight Tea Party had gathered after hearing the news and reached the unavoidable conclusion that Reito had quit being an adventurer. One of the members spoke in a low voice, wondering aloud whether anyone actually knew where Reito was now. A girl in the group expressed regret that she had never properly exchanged contact information with him and lamented that he was not there for her to reach out to. Another woman admitted that she had always been curious about Reito as a person and asked whether anyone had ever thought to get his contact information. The first girl said quickly that it was not as though she had been particularly interested in him, trying to make it sound casual. A woman with short hair commented that the whole thing was boring. The first girl told her firmly that this was no time for jokes, and that what she really wanted to know was where Reito was right now. Meanwhile, in a completely different part of the world, Reito was sitting alone on a bench in a playground. Flowers were blooming nearby, and a light breeze moved through the air. He was in considerable discomfort, complaining quietly to himself that his head was pounding. The night before, he had ended up drinking far more than intended with the restaurant staff, and had eventually passed out drunk. He thought of it with embarrassment and let out a long sigh. His first instinct was to use magic to clear the headache, but then the thought of Kaori surfaced in his mind. He decided against clearing his head. If he recovered his full clarity now, all the memories from the previous evening would come rushing back with it, and he was not ready to face them yet. He resigned himself to sitting with a headache and decided he would just eat the cup of instant noodles he had with him instead. Before he could start eating, a voice called out to him. He looked up. It was a girl, and she was asking him plainly to buy her food. Reito was baffled by the request. The girl explained herself by saying that she had not eaten breakfast yet, and that as a cute girl, she was asking him for help. Reito looked at her and could not quite figure out what to make of her. He told her he was not going to buy her food. She called him stingy. She then looked at him more carefully and asked whether he was one of those people who had been let go from a job, suggesting that the reason he was sitting in a park at that early hour was because he had nowhere else to be. Reito told her that was not it and told her she should not be sitting around asking strangers for food. She had school to go to and should hurry up and get there. The girl paused and then said hesitantly that she had dropped out of school. Reito went quiet. She continued talking, saying that a lot had happened and that she might die today or tomorrow. She said that if even one person out there happened to remember her even a little, that would mean something to her, and that was why she had been talking to people. She let out a small laugh and said she did not know why she was telling all of this to a stranger. Maybe, she said, it was because something about him made it easy to talk. Reito sat with what she had just said. He thought to himself that this girl was saying some genuinely heavy things in a very light tone. He sighed and decided to share something of his own. He told her that he had tried to propose to someone the night before, only to have her turn him down, and had then found out that the woman he had been with since high school had already been with someone else the whole time. The girl responded immediately, saying that what had happened to him was incredibly lame and that his ex had clearly been cheating on him. She then added her own situation to the conversation. Her parents had abandoned her and left without a word. She had found out that someone had submitted a school withdrawal form in her name without her knowledge or consent. She had been too embarrassed to tell any of her friends what had happened. Her living situation had also collapsed, leaving her with nowhere to go back to. She could not even get a regular part-time job because she was not old enough to sign contracts without parental approval. The only path that seemed open to her was becoming an adventurer, but she had never fought anything in her life and had no experience at all. She said plainly that because of this, there was a real chance she would end up as food for a monster by the following day. Reito looked at her as she talked. Now that he was really paying attention, he could see that her face was worn out beneath the energy she was projecting. She was acting cheerful and lively, but her eyes were completely exhausted and hollow. And yet, looking deeper into those same eyes, he could still see something in them. A stubbornness, a refusal to give up on being alive. He called out to her and offered her the cup of noodles, saying she could have them. The girl was surprised and then immediately made a face, saying there was no way she was eating that and asking what he was thinking. She said she was hungry, but she was not about to eat someone else's leftovers. Reito pointed out that he had not taken a single bite yet because she had started talking to him before he had the chance. A loud grumble from her stomach settled the argument. She accepted the noodles. She noted right away that they had gone soggy. Reito told her that was her own fault for talking so much. She started eating. As she did, tears began to fall from her eyes without her seeming to fully realize it. Reito watched her and smiled quietly. She laughed through her tears, saying she had known the noodles would taste bad, but that there was something strangely comforting about them. She said out loud that she did not want to die. She did not want to end up as food for some monster. She sniffled as she said it. Reito told her that was exactly the right attitude to have, and that they should both stubbornly hold on to living no matter what. When she had finished eating, Reito stood up and told her something practical. He explained that for a G-class dungeon, no license was required to enter. She would not die in a place like that. It would be a safe enough environment for her to start gaining real experience as an adventurer, and he told her he would go with her, so she did not need to worry. The girl looked at him sideways and asked whether this was some kind of attempt to get close to her, making it clear that she was not interested in anything like that. Reito told her no, and explained his reasons simply. If she died, it would leave a bad feeling with him, and he was helping her to avoid that outcome. It was for his own peace of mind as a former adventurer, nothing more than that. The girl considered this and decided she would accept his help. She introduced herself as Karen Hiiragi and greeted him properly. Reito introduced himself in return. He thought to himself that he had reached a point where he had stopped caring about much of anything, but that he was going to do this. He would look after this girl for a while and see where things went from there. He told Karen that he would treat her to a cream-filled bun for dessert. Karen said she was happy about that, but asked with genuine curiosity why specifically a cream-filled bun. Karen was eating with obvious enjoyment and expressing how delicious the food was. Reito sat across from her and reflected quietly on how he had suddenly ended up heading into a dungeon with a high school girl he had never met before that morning. Even he was genuinely surprised by how quickly things had developed. He watched her eat and noted that she was clearly savoring every bite. He told her to eat as much as she wanted while she had the chance, because after this they were going to be working hard collecting magic stones. Karen asked whether magic stones were the ones used for power generation. Try to remember what she had heard about them. Reito explained that they were an eco-friendly fuel source that was extremely practical and useful, which was why the government purchased them. He also mentioned that when used directly on the human body, magic stones could increase stamina or even allow the user to perform magic, though he was quick to note that doing so was illegal. To illustrate the point, he held up a finger and produced a small, glowing orb of light. Karen stared at it in amazement, telling him she had never seen anyone use magic in real life before. Reito told her to pay attention to where she was walking as she gawked. They eventually arrived at their destination. Karen stood in front of the building and looked at it with wide eyes. Reito explained that what she was looking at was a G-class dungeon, specifically the local Adventurers Guild Katsushika branch. When they stepped inside, Karen immediately remarked that it looked like an entirely ordinary building and asked whether this was really the place. A woman at the front counter welcomed them and asked for their identification. She then looked more carefully at Reito and recognized him with visible surprise, though Reito did not immediately recognize her in return. Karen asked whether the two of them knew each other. Reito thought for a moment and said he believed there had been someone like her in his high school class, though he was not certain. The woman at the counter then demonstrated that she knew about the events of the previous evening. She told Reito she had heard he had been turned down by Kaori, and then proudly announced that she was the one who had introduced Katsuki to Kaori in the first place. Reito processed this and realized she was the one behind everything that had happened. The woman continued, saying that Kaori was a beautiful woman and that Katsuki was simply a better match for her. She then brought up the fact that Reito's adventurer's license had been revoked and told him bluntly that he should stop coming around places like this and go and find a regular job instead. Reito responded calmly, saying that he had no shortage of money even for personal care. The woman told him to spare her the excuses and said his attitude was exactly why adventurers had the reputation they did. She took his identification card and fed it into a machine, typed something on the computer, and announced with satisfaction that she had added him to the blacklist, meaning he would not be able to re-register his license. She declared that adventurers were losers, told him to accept it and move on, and then pointed at Karen as well, telling her that she would be far better off studying hard and pursuing a career as a civil servant rather than spending time with someone like Reito. Reito was beginning to feel that it was probably about time he said something back to her, but when he glanced at Karen, he saw that she was already trembling. Her fists were clenched tightly at her sides. Reito recognized immediately that the situation was getting close to something he needed to stop before it escalated further. He stepped in and told the woman behind the counter to bring things to a close there. At that moment, another woman arrived from somewhere in the building and asked what exactly the woman at the counter was doing during working hours. The woman at the counter was visibly caught off guard. The newly arrived woman, who had short hair, calmly told the first woman to head to the back room and that she would take over from here. The first woman complied and left without further argument. The short-haired woman turned to Reito and Karen, apologized for what they had witnessed, and asked how she could help them. Reito thought to himself that this one seemed like a decent person. Reito explained that the girl beside him was hoping to become an adventurer, but that he would be accompanying her, so he wanted to obtain the necessary admission permission. The short-haired woman said she understood and began verifying his identity. While she worked on it, Reito and Karen waited. Reito reached over and patted Karen on the head. He thanked her quietly, acknowledging that she had gotten angry on his behalf. Karen smiled and let out a small laugh, telling him he was welcome. A short while later, the short-haired woman provided them with a pass. Reito pointed out where the entrance gate was and noted that there were other adventurers already present, most of them equipped with weapons and armor. Karen looked at herself and then at Reito and asked whether it was really going to be all right for them to go in essentially empty-handed, with no visible armor or weapons to speak of. Reito told her to watch him and then spoke a brief chant for space magic. Something glowed in front of them. Karen stared at it in amazement and asked what it was. Reito explained that it was a form of magic that summoned a separate pocket of space that could be used for storage. He reached into it and produced a set of personal armor, handing it to Karen and telling her to go to the changing room and put it on. Karen could hardly believe what she was seeing and thanked him. Reito told her to come back to the lobby once she was done and they would head in together. She said she understood and went off to change. Reito waited in the lobby and checked his phone to pass the time. He thought through what they would encounter inside. The monsters in a G-class dungeon were the same as always, which meant his usual weapons would be sufficient. Since it was Karen's first time, he planned to start her off learning the basics with a sword. 10 minutes passed, and she had not come back yet. He reminded himself that the plan after the exploration was to go and eat somewhere. 30 minutes went by. He began to wonder whether it really took that long for girls to get changed. Inside the changing room, Karen had been hesitating, unsure of how to put the armor on properly. She eventually came back out and stood in front of Reito, holding the armor and asking how she was supposed to wear it. Reito apologized and said he had forgotten to explain. He showed her that there was a small switch near the wrist area of the armor and that she simply needed to tap it there. When she did, the armor immediately adjusted and fitted itself to her body. Karen was amazed. She remarked to Reito that it looked and felt almost the same as what she had on before putting it on. Reito told her that was because it was transparent armor, but that it was full body protection. It was also stretchable, so the fit would adjust itself to her size perfectly. Karen mentioned that it did feel a little tight around the chest and around the waist. Reito immediately turned his face away and told her it was not a problem at all. Karen asked if she looked strange somehow. He said no and suggested they get moving. As they walked through the facility, the other adventurers nearby noticed them and began whispering among themselves, asking who the person with no visible armor was and expressing disbelief. The moment was interrupted by a shout for help from somewhere nearby. An adventurer was calling urgently for medical staff. A staff member came running and asked what was wrong. Another adventurer explained that someone had fallen off a cliff during a battle with a monster inside the dungeon. The injured adventurer was in visible pain, saying it really hurt and that the bleeding would not stop. He said he had not been told it was going to be this dangerous. Karen looked at the wounded man. The adventurer said that he had only come because he had heard there was good money to be made in dungeons. He cursed at the situation. Karen's expression shifted and she looked frightened. Reito told her it was all right and that the medical staff were there to handle it, so they should leave it to the professionals and make their way to the entrance gate. Karen agreed and followed him, but Reito noticed she was clutching the sleeve of her outfit. He asked whether she was worried. She said yes and pointed out that the injured man had been bleeding heavily. She asked whether adventurers really ended up like that. Even people with proper equipment had gotten hurt, she said, and she was dressed in what looked like casual clothes by comparison. She had heard she could make money doing this, but she was still scared. Her hand was shaking. She found herself thinking back to what the receptionist at the counter had said about how Karen might be better off becoming a public servant rather than getting hurt and being called a loser like the rest of them. She wondered whether she should be looking for a normal job instead. She genuinely was not sure whether it was really okay for her to be doing this. Reito was quiet for a moment. He touched his forehead, thinking. He asked if he could call her by her first name. Then he brought up something she had not expected. He told her that he had been called a loser and all sorts of other things by people today, and asked her to guess how much he had earned the previous month. Karen guessed around 200,000 yen. Reito told her that was nowhere near it. His income after reaching the rank he had achieved was 20 billion yen, just from the previous month alone. Karen went completely still, unable to say anything for a moment. She repeated the number back to him in disbelief. Reito confirmed it and added that the amount deposited into his account was only part of it, and that the actual total was even higher. He pointed back toward the counter and noted that the receptionist over there had called him a loser despite the fact that his monthly take-home income was 2 billion yen. He asked whether that was not laughable. He then pointed out that the armor Karen was currently wearing had cost at least 50 million yen. Karen looked down at herself, thinking about how thin and light it felt, and said she could not believe it. Reito told her that despite how it looked, it was hundreds of times more durable than any standard rental protective equipment. He acknowledged that adventurers genuinely did face life-threatening danger on a regular basis, and that dungeons were filled with traps and hazards that could kill a person. But he told her plainly that no matter what happened, she was not going to be in danger. He said it clearly and with certainty. Whatever came up, he would protect her life. Karen was visibly moved by hearing this. Raito continued and told her that dungeons held infinite possibilities for those willing to pursue them. He told her to give everything she had and to push herself toward the top with everything she had in her. They stepped through the entrance gate and into the dungeon. The space inside looked like an open, empty grassland stretching out before them. Karen stared at it and quietly said that this was a dungeon. Raito explained that the G-class dungeon at the Katsushika Ward branch was commonly known as Lumberjack's Clearing. He walked ahead of her. Karen looked around at the open space and made up her mind. She told herself and him that she was going to do her best. She was going to become an adventurer, and she was going to become incredibly strong. She would show everyone. The two of them were now inside the dungeon. Raito told Karen they would proceed carefully as they moved deeper in, and she agreed. He used his space magic and retrieved a weapon, handing it to her before they went any further. Karen looked at what he had given her. It was a sword, just a plain sword, and she seemed slightly underwhelmed. Given how extraordinary the armor had been, she had quietly been hoping the weapon might do something impressive, like shoot beams at the push of a button. Raito told her plainly that it was just a regular iron sword, and that nothing more was needed. The only monsters that appeared in this dungeon were weak wolf-type creatures, and a basic sword was more than sufficient to deal with them. Karen pointed out that wolves were still pretty frightening regardless of their rank. Raito told her that the visibility in this area was excellent, with clear sight lines in every direction, which meant there was no real risk of anything sneaking up on them. He told her to relax and simply scan the surroundings as she walked. Karen looked around and had to admit that the visibility was indeed impressive. Before long, she spotted a wolf in the distance. Raito stepped back and told her to try something, anything at all, and that if things got dangerous, he would step in and help. Karen hesitated, not quite ready to move. The wolf did not hesitate at all. It charged directly at her. Karen shrieked and stumbled back from the speed of it. Raito called out to her to just hit it with her sword. Karen swung, asking whether that was the right way to do it. Raito reminded her not to take her eyes off the enemy and warned her it was coming again. The swing connected. Karen fell to the ground from the impact, and the sword dropped out of her hand and landed beside her. She looked at it on the ground, and when she looked up, the wolf was still approaching. It leaped toward her. Raito moved instantly, getting between her and the wolf and cutting it down before it could reach her. He turned to check on her. He reminded her that he had said he would protect her. He asked if she was all right. Karen told him she had genuinely thought she was going to die and thanked him. Raito told her simply that he would save her no matter how many times it was necessary. Something small and shining caught Karen's eye near her hand. She picked it up and asked whether it was a magic stone. Raito confirmed it. She held it up and remarked on how beautiful it was, commenting on its mysterious color. She turned it over in her fingers and thought out loud about how this small object translated into money. Then her eyes lit up as she remembered what Raito had told her earlier, that absorbing a magic stone directly into the body could boost stamina or even allow a person to use magic. She hinted strongly that she wanted to try doing that right now. Raito told her not to and explained why. Depending on the quantity, she would need to pay taxes on the stones later. Failing to declare them properly would count as tax evasion, and she could actually be arrested for it. Karen imagined herself being hauled away and immediately decided that was not something she wanted anywhere near her. She got back on her feet. Raito warned her that another wolf was already on its way. Karen was startled back into focus. Raito told her to dodge to the right. She moved, and the wolf missed her. He reminded her again not to take her eyes off the monster and to wait for the right moment before swinging. Karen gripped the sword, steadied herself, and then slashed. The wolf went down. Raito called out his encouragement, telling her that was a good hit. Karen stared at the fallen wolf and said quietly to herself that she had actually done it. Raito pointed out that the animal was still alive and that she needed to keep hitting it until it was finished. Karen said understood and struck again. This time the wolf lay still on the ground. Its body dissolved into smoke, and left behind in its place was another glimmering magic stone. Karen announced with clear delight that she had defeated the wolf on her own. Raito praised her warmly, telling her she had done amazingly well and that she should be proud of herself. He walked over to her and patted her on the head. Karen immediately told him that counted as sexual harassment. Raito apologized. Karen's face turned pink, but after a brief pause, she said that it was actually fine if it was him doing it. She admitted that she had never really been praised by anyone before, and that it made her genuinely happy to hear it. Raito told her he was glad to hear that, and said they should keep at it and take down the monsters one after another. Karen agreed and threw herself back into the fight. She slashed her way through another wolf and collected another stone. Then another fight, more stones. She kept going, building confidence and rhythm with each encounter. Then she found herself facing two wolves at the same time. Raito reminded her to be careful. Karen set her eyes on both of them and did not flinch. The first wolf leaped, and she swung to meet it. She felt the second, one coming from behind, and spun to face it. She managed to take them both down. They dissolved into smoke together. Raito called out that she had done a great job. Karen, overflowing with excitement and relief, threw her arms around him in a hug. Raito stood there and thought to himself that he was genuinely impressed. She might actually have a real talent for this. There was a possibility she was a hidden gem as an adventurer. Then he noticed the way she was pressing against him, and his face went red. He firmly told himself not to think anything inappropriate. At the reception counter, they laid out their collection. The receptionist counted a total of 72 magic stones. Since Karen was taking all of them, the receptionist explained that the tax needed to be paid in cash. Reito explained to Karen that the tax rate on magic stones was 45%, but told her not to worry about memorizing the exact number. The simple rule to remember was that whenever she was not exchanging her stones, she would need to have money ready to pay for them. Later, Reito explained to Karen how to absorb a magic stone. She needed to take a slow, deep breath and then press the stone firmly against her chest. Karen did as he described, and a soft glow surrounded her for a moment. The stone disappeared. She noticed that she had shimmered briefly, but said that she did not really feel much different. Reito told her that was about what she should expect from a G-rank magic stone. Once she had finished absorbing all of them, he told her they should go get something to eat. Karen thanked him and started to address him, trying out different versions of his name. She tried Haru and then stopped, deciding it did not sound right. She tried Ray next and paused again. Reito watched her quietly while she worked through it. Then Karen murmured a word to herself and looked up at him. She asked whether it would be all right to call him master. He asked whether she really meant that. She said yes and gave a reasoning. He was incredibly strong, and he was genuinely good at teaching. Calling him master simply felt right to her. Reito said it was a strange thing to be called, but told her she could call him whatever she liked. He then told her to hurry up and finish absorbing the remaining stones, because he was planning to take her out for yakiniku for dinner. Karen responded with immediate and enthusiastic agreement, calling him master and declaring that he was the best. Reito turned the word over in his mind as she said it. Master. He decided it was not bad at all. It had a nice ring to it. Karen ran ahead of him toward the exit, repeating the word over and over again with obvious enjoyment. Reito called after her and told her she was saying it far too much. Another day began with the sound of an alarm going off. Reito woke up slowly, muttering to himself that morning had come around already. He slipped on his house shoes and put on his clothes, grumbling quietly about how sleepy he still was. He turned on the stove and began making breakfast. He noticed his suit nearby and tossed it into the laundry basket. As he moved around the kitchen, wiping his face, the events of the previous day came back to him one by one. The failed proposal, the end of his career as an adventurer, and everything that had followed after that had been a complete whirlwind from start to finish. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. He turned his head and found Karen standing there in just her underwear, looking frantic and asking urgently whether something smelled like it was burning. Reito registered the situation and thought to himself that somehow he had ended up with a freeloader living in his home. He suggested to Karen as calmly as he could manage that she might want to put something on first. Karen shrieked at him and told him not to look at her. He turned his back immediately and told her not to worry, because he was not looking. He then asked why she was in this part of the apartment in the first place, and dressed like that no less. He pointed out that the room he had lent her had its own bathroom, sink, and toilet. Karen argued that the smell of burning had reached all the way to her room, and that was why she had come running. Reito thought about it, and realized that was because he had been in the middle of making breakfast and had clearly let something go wrong on the stove. Karen, embarrassed but determined, declared that the smell was obviously the result of a cooking disaster and insisted on taking over from that point. She told him to keep his back turned and just wait while she handled it. Reito agreed to that arrangement without argument. A little while later, genuinely delicious-looking food was laid out on the table. Reito looked at it with visible surprise and sat down to try it. He tasted it and told her it was genuinely delicious. Karen was happy to hear that. He asked whether she had slept well the night before. Karen said yes with a bright expression, but added that the experience had been strange in one way. She thought it might have been related to the magic stone she had absorbed the day before, because she had felt very warm throughout the night, which was why she had ended up removing her clothes while she slept. She then mentioned that she had also had a dream. The dream had been about the time her parents had abandoned her. In it, she had come home to find the furniture, the things her family had owned, all of it gone. She had tried to reach her parents, but could not get through to them at all. The landlord had kicked her out of the apartment, with nowhere to go. She had gone to her school first thing the next morning, only to find out that a withdrawal notice had already been submitted in her name without her knowledge. She had barely had any money and no place she could go. She had simply sat there and cried, not knowing what to do. The dream had ended at the point where she had found herself wandering aimlessly and ended up in the park. She said it had been a terrible dream to have. Reito took a quiet sip from his cup and then told her to cheer up. He reminded her that what came after that part of the dream was where she would meet him at the park. He told her that if he ever showed up in her dreams, he would not allow things to turn into a nightmare, because she was his precious disciple. Karen's eyes lit up at hearing those words. She said out loud that her master was exactly what she had expected him to be. Reito let out a short laugh. He told her to finish her food quickly because they were going out that day. It was time to go shopping. They arrived at a large mall a little while later. Reito told Karen that they would start with clothes and that she should feel free to get whatever she wanted. Karen said immediately that she was completely fine with buying inexpensive things. Reito told her not to hold back. Karen shook her head and said his relationship with money was completely out of touch with reality. She brought up the yakiniku restaurant from the evening before, which had been extremely expensive, and yet Reito had ordered all-you-can-eat without even thinking about it. She also pointed out that the entire top floor of the tower he lived in was his personal apartment. Reito replied simply that if he did not spend money, it just kept accumulating on its own. Karen told him with wide eyes that was exactly the problem she was trying to describe. As they walked through the mall, Reito noticed a particular store and stopped. He asked Karen whether she liked that brand. Karen recognized it immediately. It was Twilight MA, a brand she had admired for a long time and had always wanted to try at least once. She said they had so many different styles that she had always found appealing. Reito grinned at her and grabbed her by the hand, pulling her toward the store's entrance before she could say anything more. Karen tried to tell him she had not meant it as a hint or a request, but by that point Reito had already pushed open the door. A staff member greeted them as they entered. Reito asked the staff to help Karen choose some outfits. The staff member agreed and got to work. Reito told Karen to pick out a few things, try them on, and show him. Karen said yes and began looking through the racks, her face flushing with excitement and a little embarrassment. She came out in the first outfit and showed him. Then she tried an off-shoulder style. Then a third option that had the brand's name displayed prominently across the front. She said out loud how much she genuinely loved this brand. Reito told her that everything looked wonderful on her and that they would buy all the ones she had tried on. Karen was stunned. She pointed out that the items were extremely expensive. Reito told her again not to hold back. The staff member returned at that point and noticed that Reito's own clothing also appeared to be from the same brand. Reito confirmed this and mentioned that he happened to have something of a personal connection with the brand. They left the store with Karen's arms full and her face glowing with happiness. They continued through the mall, and Karen looked at various other things as they walked, picking up some mugs, shampoo, and underwear along the way. After a while, they stopped for ice cream. Karen ate hers with pure joy written all over her face. Reito watched her and smiled to himself. He told her there was still plenty of time before evening and asked whether there was anywhere else she wanted to go. Karen looked up at him with a slightly surprised expression, as though she had not expected to be asked. After thinking about it for a moment, she told him that she wanted to go back to the dungeon again. Reito asked whether she really wanted to go back, even though they had just been there the day before. Karen said yes without any hesitation. She wanted to get stronger as quickly as possible. Her goal was to become as strong as Reito, to reach a point where she could take down enemies with a single clean strike the way he did. Reito smiled at hearing this and told her that was exactly the kind of attitude she needed to have. He suggested they head back to the apartment first, drop off everything they had bought, and then go. Karen agreed right away. Later, when they arrived at the dungeon, something unexpected happened. The receptionist greeted them, but then apologized and said there were two things she needed to confirm before they could proceed. Karen asked what the issues were. The receptionist explained that the first concern was a report they had received saying that someone had entered the dungeon without wearing any protective gear. The second was a claim that Harukaze was having Hiiragi defeat monsters for him, so that he could unfairly collect and profit from the rewards. These were the two reports that had been submitted against them. Karen immediately spoke up and said that it was outrageous and that her master would never do anything like that. Reito gently told Karen to step back for a moment. He glanced around the room. He could feel hostile eyes watching him from multiple directions. He recognized the type immediately, the kind of people who were always hanging around places like this looking for trouble. Reito addressed the first concern by telling the receptionist to take a look at something and showed her what he had. The receptionist examined it and her eyes widened. She recognized what she was looking at. She said that she had not expected someone to walk into a G-rank dungeon wearing an inner suit, describing it as a form of impenetrable defense. She apologized and said that in light of this, there was no issue with the first report at all. She thought to herself privately that it was the first time she had ever seen an actual inner suit in person. Reito then addressed the second concern. He pointed out that Karen was the one who had been absorbing all of the magic stones herself. Karen confirmed this immediately and said that she was the one taking all of them because she wanted to grow stronger and that her master had not done anything wrong at all. She said she wanted to continue learning and developing under his guidance. The receptionist paused for a moment and then smiled, saying that in that case there appeared to be no issue and that they could resume the registration process. Before things could move forward, Reito noticed someone approaching. A young man came up and addressed Reito in a disrespectful tone, calling out to him and referring to him as old man. He told Reito that since he had been reported, he should just let the girl go already. Reito pointed out with clear irritation that he was only 24 years old and that people like this had no business calling him that. The receptionist told Reito she would be right back and asked him to wait for just a moment. Reito said that was fine. The young man, who had two others standing behind him, pressed on. He told Reito to stop pretending he was innocent. His accusation was that Reito was using Karen to do the work while he pocketed the rewards for himself. He told Reito to let Karen go and said she should be joining a party with them instead. Karen stepped in and said firmly that she was not being used by anyone. The young man assumed that Karen had been threatened into saying that and made a pitying remark about it. He went on to criticize Reito further, calling him a scumbag and saying that dragging a girl around dangerous dungeons while giving her inadequate equipment was disgraceful. He called him an old man again. Reito thought to himself that being called that repeatedly was genuinely starting to get on his nerves. The commotion had begun to draw people toward the reception counter. Bystanders were whispering among themselves. One person said that the man in question was apparently extremely dangerous. A girl nearby said she was frightened. Karen looked around at the gathering crowd with a wary expression. There was a loud thud as Reito placed something firmly on the table. He told the people around him that what he had just set down was top-grade protective gear, an inner suit. He said that as long as Karen was wearing it, there was absolutely no safety concern whatsoever, and that the receptionist had already confirmed this herself. Before he could continue, the receptionist returned and thanked him for his patience. She then addressed the person who had filed the report, calling him by name, Mr. Nomura, and asking him to look at something she had in front of her. She showed him a receipt for the magic stone tax payment that had been made the previous day. Harukaze had made the full payment himself and had confirmed that he had received all of the stones. There was no evidence at all that he had been profiting from Karen's efforts unfairly. Nomura refused to accept this and insisted that Reito had to be taking rewards from the magic stone somehow. Reito responded with a question, asking what rewards Nomura was expecting him to be chasing. He pointed out that a G-rank magic stone, even if cashed in, would amount to barely more than pocket change. He said out loud that Nomura must have thought very little of him if he believed he would work his student to exhaustion for something so trivial. Karen stepped forward and placed herself between Reito and the group. She addressed Nomura directly and told him that her master had treated her with genuine kindness throughout. She said she had no intention of entering a dungeon with anyone other than her master, and that she had made that decision for herself. The young men looked at each other, visibly embarrassed by the outcome. They took a step back, then turned and made their way quickly toward the exit. Reito let out a quiet smile and then a sigh of relief, saying that it seemed like the matter had been settled. Karen turned to thank the receptionist. Reito apologized for causing any disruption. The receptionist smiled and introduced herself as Sarah Watari, saying she looked forward to working with them going forward. Outside the building, the three young men stood together. Nomura punched the wall in frustration, unable to make sense of how things had gone. He cursed under his breath and said that he would remember this. Karen told Reito she had a question she wanted to ask him. Reito told her to go ahead. She asked how he used magic. It had been a few days since they had started going into dungeons together, and somewhere along the way Karen had developed a strong curiosity about magic and how it worked. They were in the middle of a fight when she brought it up. While dealing with an incoming wolf, Karen said out loud that if she could use magic, she would feel like a real adventurer in the truest sense. She found attack spells genuinely exciting, and the kind of spatial storage magic that Reito had demonstrated struck her as incredibly useful. Reito told her that what she was referring to was called spatial magic. As he watched her fight, he thought to himself that her growth over the past few days had been genuinely impressive. She had become confident even when facing multiple enemies at once, and her physical strength and speed had clearly increased thanks to the magic stones she had been absorbing. The stones from the defeated wolves fell to the ground around her. Reito began to think that perhaps the time had come to start developing her magical aptitude as well. Karen called out that she thought she could take on 5 enemies at once now. Reito called her name and asked whether she would like him to teach her magic. Karen stopped in her tracks. Her face immediately lit up, and she asked eagerly whether he was serious. Reito told her yes, but added that she would need to study first. She would not be able to use it straight away. Her excitement dimmed slightly at the mention of studying. Reito explained that while there were rare individuals who could use magic purely by intuition, magic was fundamentally a special kind of phenomenon grounded in science. Having magical power alone was not enough. Understanding was also required. Karen's expression fell a little further when she heard that studying was involved. Reito looked ahead and spotted monsters in the distance. He told Karen he would show her a demonstration and decided to use fire magic. Karen immediately perked up and excitedly said she pictured her master launching fireballs or something along those lines. There was a sudden explosion. Karen flinched and turned to Reito with an expression that was less than impressed. She told him that was not at all what she had imagined. She had pictured something like launching a fireball through the air, or forging a flaming sword, or holding out a hand and chanting a spell in a dramatic and cool way. Reito raised his palm and produced a controlled flame on it, asking if that was more along the lines of what she meant. She immediately said yes, that was much better. She said the sudden explosion from before had not felt magical at all, and was more like a gas explosion. Reito reminded her that this was not a game world. It was reality. He pointed out that if a person wasted time standing still and chanting words during a fight, a monster would take them out before the spell was done. What mattered was fighting efficiently. Karen muttered that she had really been hoping to shout the word fireball at some point. Reito told her that once she had gotten stronger, yelling the name of a spell would probably be fine. She said she would do her best. Studying began. After some time had passed, Karen flopped and said her head was completely full. Reito told her that was enough for her first lesson and that they would stop there for the day. They began walking back toward the gate. As they walked, Karen called out to him and asked whether she thought she would really be able to use magic someday. Her head felt so muddled, and she could not imagine herself actually doing it. Reito told her that in magic, people had natural affinities for certain elements such as water or earth, and that for some reason these affinities often connected to a person's name. He pointed out that her name was Karen, and with a name like that she should have a natural talent for fire magic. He told her she would definitely be able to use it someday. Karen looked down at her own palm, quietly turning his words over in her mind. Then Reito spotted something ahead and stopped. A crowd had gathered in their path. He told Karen to stop walking. Nomura stepped forward from the group and told Reito he had been waiting. He said that Reito had a lot of nerve showing his face after what had happened between them. Nomura declared that Reito was finished, and then directed threatening words toward Karen as well, saying things that made Karen freeze in shock. Reito told Karen not to worry and assured her that a group like this was no match for him. He gave Nomura a clear and calm warning to walk away. Nomura told him to be quiet and mocked Reito, suggesting that if he had been truly strong, he would not have retired from being an adventurer at his age. Karen asked her master quietly what they should do. Reito told her not to be concerned. He looked at the group and noted that their weapon stances were completely wrong and that they had no real fighting ability. Nomura gave a signal, and his companions moved to attack. Reito immediately instructed Karen to dodge. She moved without thinking and then looked at herself in genuine surprise, asking whether she had actually just dodged that. Reito told her he had said as much. These people were far weaker than the wolf monsters she had been fighting. They were simply using their numbers to seem intimidating. He told her again that she was definitely getting stronger. Reito made a decision. He told Karen to move away from the group. If this continued without being resolved, it would never end. And since they had the opportunity, he wanted to show her a different kind of magic from what he had demonstrated before. The group came at them again. Reito told Karen he was going to use wind magic this time. The men lunged forward and then suddenly stopped. They could not move. Reito held out his palm calmly. The men began to choke. Their weapons fell from their hands. Nomura looked around in panic and demanded to know what was happening. Reito looked at him. Nomura began to feel it too and could not understand what was going on around him. He gasped that he could not breathe and crumpled to the ground. The others followed. Reito looked at what he had done and then explained it to Karen. He had lowered the concentration of oxygen in the air around them. He asked Karen whether she was hurt. She said she was not. Reito assured her not to worry about the men, saying they had simply lost consciousness from oxygen deprivation and nothing more. He then told her to watch as he demonstrated one more thing, gravity magic. The unconscious men began to float upward off the ground. Karen whispered in amazement that magic was truly incredible. Reito told her it could be applied in all sorts of ways, depending on how a person thought about it. As they made their way out of the dungeon with the floating unconscious men in tow, Karen looked at her own palm and quietly tried to chant the word fireball. Nothing happened. Reito noticed her expression and asked what was wrong. She told him it was nothing. They returned to the reception area. The receptionist looked at the floating unconscious figures and asked what in the world had happened. Reito explained that the men had attacked them inside the dungeon and that he had knocked them out. He asked the receptionist to hand them over to the police. The receptionist recognized one of the unconscious men and confirmed it was Nomura. An older man, standing near the counter, looked at Nomura and then turned to Reito with shock on his face. He demanded to know what had been done to him and informed Reito that Nomura was the son of a city councilman. He declared that since Reito had rendered someone unconscious, it was Reito who should be handed over to the police. Reito told him calmly that Nomura and the others had been the ones who had launched the attack. He said he did not care who Nomura's father was, and pointed out that attacking someone directly in front of a security camera was not a particularly intelligent decision. The old man went pale. Reito suggested he simply check the camera near the gate, where the entire incident would have been recorded. The old man sputtered and said that if this became a serious matter, he could not finish his thought because Reito cut him off. Reito said firmly that he would be filing a criminal report without fail. He pointed out that if they let these men go without consequence, there was nothing to stop them from coming back and doing the same thing again. The old man was left without a response. He walked away telling Reito not to say he had not been warned and that Reito should not regret this later. Karen, standing just behind Reito, asked quietly whether he was sure this was the right thing to do. Reito told her it was fine. The two of them were going to be coming here regularly from now on, which was exactly why any problems needed to be addressed before they could grow into bigger ones. Karen thanked her master. Reito turned to Surwatari and told her he was going to file a police report and asked whether she could take care of the magic stone paperwork in the meantime. Surwatari said yes and offered a sincere apology for everything that had occurred. Reito walked ahead and told them to wait for him. Karen turned to Surwatari and said how frightening the whole experience had been. Surwatari agreed that it certainly had been, and added that she would be reporting the behavior of the staff member who had caused problems at the counter earlier to her superiors. She then said that Karen was truly fortunate to have such a wonderful master looking out for her. Karen agreed wholeheartedly, saying that her master was a genuinely remarkable person. When Reito came back, he looked at the two of them and noticed something in their expressions. He asked what was going on with their faces and whether they had been talking about something entertaining. Karen quickly said it was nothing at all. Karen was in the kitchen preparing a meal with pork, ginger, green onions, and various seasonings, clearly putting real effort into what she was making. When Reito came out and was heading toward the door, Karen called out to let him know that lunch might end up being a little late. Reito asked what she was cooking. Karen laughed and told him it was a secret until it was finished. Reito thought about the situation as he watched her. Ever since Karen had started living at the apartment, she had taken it upon herself to handle all of the housework. He had tried to tell her that it was unnecessary because he had already hired professionals to take care of everything, but she always insisted that she needed to repay him in some way for having helped her when she had nowhere to go. He then noticed that she was cooking in her pajamas and asked her about it. Karen explained that she did not have an apron. Reito understood immediately and asked whether they should go buy one later. Karen was delighted and thanked him. He thought to himself that Karen had settled into this life quite comfortably. A short while later, she announced proudly that she had made kakuni, a braised pork belly dish, though she admitted it had taken longer than expected. She also mentioned that she had cooked a generous amount of rice to go along with it. Reito praised her cooking and told her she was genuinely talented in the kitchen. Karen thanked him. Reito then brought up something practical. He mentioned that they also needed to sort out a new smartphone contract for her at some point, pointing out that her previous one had been canceled at some stage. Karen said yes, that was right. Reito added that it would cause problems going forward if they could not reach each other when they were apart. Karen observed that she had rarely seen Reito use his own phone very much. Reito explained that when he had been an active adventurer, he and the other members of his group had communicated using the contact function built into their adventurer licenses, which was why none of them had ever really exchanged phone numbers in the traditional sense. Karen said she understood. Reito went quiet for a moment. It occurred to him that he had not contacted anyone at all since his license had expired. Later that day, they were back in the dungeon and in the middle of fighting. Karen slashed one of the wolves cleanly. Reito called out his encouragement. Karen continued her attack and swung her sword, but suddenly her eyes went wide. The sword had gotten stuck inside the monster, and she could not pull it free. She looked around and realized there was another wolf positioned directly behind her. She quickly ran through her options in her head. Then she made a decision. She let go of the sword entirely and threw herself out of the way as the wolf behind her lunged. Reito stepped in and finished it off. He told her it had been a good decision to let go. They sat down to take a brief rest. Karen said she had been completely panicking and half-jokingly pointed out that Reito could have saved her a little sooner. Reito told her he had trusted that she would figure out the dodge on her own. He looked at the sword she had left behind and examined it. The blade had chipped badly. He told her they would go to a weapon shop to deal with it. Karen's eyes lit up at the words weapon shop, thinking it sounded exactly like something a real adventurer would say. Reito said it was, and that just browsing was fun on its own. He told her she had worked hard enough for the day and that they would head out. Karen immediately started humming to herself with excitement as they left. Reito watched her and thought that she was very easy to read. Later they arrived at a place called B1F Weapons and Armor, the Town of Beginnings. Karen read the name out loud. They went down the stairs and Reito explained that it was a well-known shop that catered specifically to beginners. He pushed open the door. Karen stepped inside and stopped, looking around with wide eyes. The space was filled with weapons of every kind on display. She said it looked like something from a video game world. Reito told her there was quite a variety and that she should take her time and pick whatever felt right to her. Karen moved through the shop with giddy energy, studying everything around her. She looked at the display and took in how many different types of weapons there were. There were spears, axes, daggers, and other things she did not even know the names of. But when she touched one particular item, something shifted in her mind. She thought back to the memory of watching Reito cut down a monster in one smooth motion. She murmured to herself that a sword was the best after all. Meanwhile, Reito carried the chipped sword to the counter and asked about maintenance. The man at the counter looked at the blade and told Reito that continuing to use it in its current state was going to be very difficult. Reito said he had expected as much and asked the man to simply fix the chips on the blade. He clarified that he would not be using it in actual battles going forward. The man seemed to sense that the sword held some personal significance and handled it with care. Reito smiled and said yes, it did. He mentioned that there had been a time when he had swung that sword with everything he had. He walked back in the shop to find Karen and called out her name, but did not see her nearby. He moved deeper into the store and eventually spotted her. She was standing completely still, looking at something. It was a sword. She had not picked it up or asked about it. She was simply looking at it. Reito looked at the sword himself and said out loud that it had a beautiful red color. Karen startled slightly. Reito asked whether the sword had caught her interest. She said yes. The man from the counter appeared behind them and explained that the sword was a masterpiece crafted for advanced users, one of the rarest items their shop carried. The balance and center of gravity were a little unusual to manage, but the cutting edge was exceptional. Before the man could get to the price, Reito told him he would buy it. The decision was instant. The man was further stunned when Reito told him he would pay the full amount by card. Karen asked her master whether he was certain. Reito said he was. He had heard a saying that a good weapon called to its own master, and he was sure that this sword had been calling to Karen. However, he told her he was buying it for her, but he was not going to let her use it yet. They would purchase one more sword today, one that was a better match for where she was right now. Once she had grown strong enough, he would give her the red sword. He asked if that sounded good to her. Karen smiled widely and agreed without hesitation. Later, back at the dungeon, Karen held her new sword and looked at it. The wolves attacked. She bent her knees and swung, focused and determined. She cut through another one and was genuinely impressed by how sharp the blade was compared to what she had been using before. Reito mentioned that since she had a new weapon, he had thought they might try venturing a little deeper than their usual spot, and noted that she seemed to be handling it without any trouble. Karen asked about this, and Reito explained that in a dungeon, the further one moved from the entrance, the stronger the monsters that appeared. Karen guessed that the monsters in their current area were around medium strength. Reito confirmed she was right. Then Karen noticed something. There was another monster approaching, and this one was different. It had 4 eyes and was substantially larger than anything else they had encountered. Reito raised his hand to signal her to wait and stepped in front of her, telling her to move back. He explained that this monster was unlike the others. It was the boss of this dungeon's woodcutter field area and had apparently wandered into their section by mistake. Karen was visibly shocked to hear the word boss. Reito added that encounters like this were extremely rare, difficult to find even when actively seeking one out. But since they had come across it, there was no avoiding the situation. Karen stood there and thought about it for a moment. Then she told Reito she wanted to try fighting it herself. Reito told her no, that it was still too early for her, and that his answer was final. Karen said she wanted to test the limits of her current strength. The determination in her eyes was unmistakable. Reito looked at her and smiled quietly to himself, recognizing that trying to talk her out of it would be pointless. He told her not to push herself too hard. Karen said she understood and turned to face the monster. Karen stood facing the boss monster of the woodcutter's field. Reito thought through the situation carefully in his mind. Although they were inside a G-class dungeon, the boss monster itself had the equivalent strength of an E-class creature. As long as Karen was wearing her inner suit, there was no real risk of her getting seriously injured. That said, at her current level of ability, the likelihood of her actually defeating it was extremely low. Reito told Karen that depending on how things developed, he would step in and stop the fight if he needed to, and reminded her to be careful. Karen acknowledged this. Reito explained that the boss reacted to hostility, which meant the moment she took a single step forward, the battle would begin. Karen stepped forward. The boss launched itself into the air. Karen immediately went on alert and ran sideways to avoid it. The creature missed her. She swung her sword in response, but the strike did not connect. She was caught off guard by this. Fighting the boss felt completely different from anything she had faced before. The creature jumped toward her again, and she shrieked, barely managing to throw herself out of the way. She was spending all of her energy dodging and had no room to launch a proper counterattack. Reito watched her closely and did not move. Karen swung her sword again with everything she had, determined to land a hit. But she lost her footing and fell backward onto the ground. She tried to push herself back up, refusing to stay down. The boss moved in toward her, opening its mouth to bite. Before it could reach her, Reito stepped in with his sword and stopped it cold. He told Karen that was enough. Karen looked up at him in surprise. Reito told her plainly that with her current ability, going any further was not possible and that she needed to accept that for this time. Karen argued that if she kept fighting just a little longer, she would start to find her footing and get a sense of how to handle it. Reito told her that was not how it worked. He explained that if an adventurer got injured badly enough to be unable to fight, they lost their source of income entirely. Being an adventurer was a profession where reckless pushing of oneself was simply not allowed. He told her firmly that she must never forget what her original goal was. Knowing when to pull back was just as important a skill as knowing how to fight, and every adventurer needed to understand that. Karen went quiet. She pressed her hand into the grass beneath her. After a moment of silence, she said quietly that she understood and that she would give up this time. Reito told her that was the right answer. He reminded her that even without defeating the boss today, she could still earn her adventurer's license, and that they would keep working toward that together going forward. Karen stared into the distance. She muttered to herself that it was frustrating. Then she slapped herself lightly on both cheeks and said it again, as though pushing the frustration out of her system and replacing it with something else. She announced that she had made up her mind. Her goal from this point forward was to defeat that boss someday. She was going to make absolutely certain of it. Reito paused and then let out a quiet laugh. He told her that she really did make teaching her worthwhile. Karen declared again, firmly, that she had sworn to herself that she would defeat the 4th boss and that she would make sure it happened. That same day, something was taking place at the National Adventurers Guild Tokyo Branch 3. A man named Aizawa had been called in by his section chief. The chief told him that he had heard Aizawa was getting married and asked about it. Aizawa apologized for not having reported it sooner and said that the preparations were going smoothly, in part thanks to the chief's guidance. The chief responded warmly, saying that it seemed his advice about not holding back when there was a woman one wanted had paid off. Aizawa shared some of the details of how things had come about. His fiancée had been with another man for a number of years, but Aizawa had pursued her persistently regardless. In the end, she had decided that a stable civil servant like Aizawa was a better choice than the adventurer she had been with. The chief asked whether her previous partner had been an adventurer. Aizawa confirmed this and said plainly that a bottom-ranked adventurer was not a suitable match for a woman like her. He added that he had made a promise to make her happy from that point forward. The chief laughed and said he liked that kind of spirit. Before the conversation could go any further, a female co-worker appeared and told Aizawa that the guild master was asking for him and that it seemed urgent. Aizawa excused himself from the section chief, genuinely puzzled about what could be so pressing. On his way to the guild master's office, he found himself wondering whether the guild master might want to personally offer congratulations on his upcoming wedding. He dismissed the idea as unlikely and knocked on the door. Inside the office, 2 people were seated and waiting for him. A woman wearing glasses looked up at him and asked whether he was Aizawa Katsuki. She introduced herself as Shirori Kanzaki, the submaster of the Japanese branch of the International Adventurers Guild. Aizawa's mind immediately jumped to conclusions. He wondered whether this was about an overseas posting, whether they were considering headhunting him for a position abroad. He introduced himself and told her it was a pleasure to meet her, doing his best to appear composed. Aizawa thanked the visitors for making the trip all the way to the National Adventurers Guild Tokyo 3rd Division. Shirori acknowledged his formal introduction politely, but told him that lengthy pleasantries were not necessary at this moment. She explained that after a considerable amount of investigation, they had finally traced the matter back to him. She then asked Aizawa directly whether he had recently forced an adventurer into retirement. Aizawa felt fear grip him immediately. His mind raced to the worst possible conclusion. He wondered whether Shirori had somehow found out that he had used a restricted terminal. He stumbled over his words but managed to put together an explanation, saying that he had only used the information terminal outside and that it had been for work-related purposes. Shirori told him that she was not there to address the matter of the terminal. Her business concerned the adventurer that Aizawa had forced to retire, a man named Reito Harukaze. Upon hearing that name, Aizawa's tone shifted immediately, and he referred to Reito in dismissive terms, describing him as rough and uncivilized. He explained that Reito happened to be the ex-boyfriend of his fiancée. According to Aizawa's telling of it, Reito had been unable to find stable employment even after graduating, which had caused his kind-hearted girlfriend considerable worry and distress. His fiancée had expressed that she wanted Reito to live a proper and responsible life, and so Aizawa had stepped in and forced Reito to retire from adventuring on the spot. Shirori was visibly stunned by what she was hearing. The idea that Harukaze of all people had been forced into retirement in this manner was clearly beyond what she had anticipated. Aizawa attempted to calm her down. Shirori told him there was absolutely no way she could stay calm about something like this. Aizawa, beginning to sense that something was seriously wrong, acknowledged that he had assumed Reito was an ordinary adventurer like any other, but pointed out that if someone of Shiori's position and standing was personally searching for Reito, then he must have committed some kind of serious offense in forcing him out. Shirori told him sharply that he had completely misunderstood the situation. There was no criminal matter against him to discuss in that sense. The issue was the identity of the man he had banished. Reito Harukaze was, in fact, the SSS-ranked adventurer known by the name Zero. Aizawa went rigid with shock. He repeated the name Zero in a stunned stutter and asked whether Shirori was referring to the famous one. Shirori confirmed it. Aizawa asked whether she meant the one who could harvest S-rank magic stones, as though it were an everyday task. Shirori confirmed that as well. He asked again, his voice barely functioning, whether this was truly the only SSS-ranked adventurer in all of Japan. Shirori added to this, telling him that Reito was not merely the strongest in Japan, but one of the strongest adventurers in the entire world. The full weight of what he had done was beginning to sink into Aizawa, though he kept asking questions, as though confirming it repeatedly might somehow change the answer. Shirori finally called out his name with clear frustration and told him what she needed. She wanted to get in contact with Harukaze and asked whether his fiancée might have any way to reach him. Aizawa had gone completely pale by this point. He managed to say he would try calling her and made the call. Kaori answered when Katsuki's call came through, saying she happened to be off work that day, so it was fine to call. When Katsuki asked about Reito's contact information, Kaori told him that she had deleted Reito's number and all of his messages a long time ago. She had never really been interested in spending time at his home anyway, she said, adding that even on the occasions when Reito had invited her over, she had always turned him down. Katsuki pleaded with her, telling her that something important had come up and that he needed any lead he could find, no matter how small. Kaori thought about it, and then remembered something. There was a girl who had introduced her to Katsuki, and that same girl happened to work at the Katsushika branch of the Adventurers Guild. She mentioned that according to her, Reito had been seen there recently. Katsuki's voice on the other end of the phone shifted completely, and he expressed genuine relief and gratitude. After the call ended, Kaori sat there wondering what that had all been about. Back in the meeting room, Aizawa turned to Shirori with a nervous expression and relayed what he had just found out. There had been a sighting of Reito at the Katsushika branch. Shirori repeated the location with clear surprise. The man seated beside her said that the Katsushika branch was supposed to be a G-rank dungeon intended for complete beginners, and that it made no sense for someone like Reito to be spending time there. Shirori did not stop to reason through it any further. She said they were not going to sort it out by sitting where they were, and that she would head there immediately to deal with the rest in person. She thanked Aizawa briefly for the information, and then slammed the door shut behind her as she left. Aizawa stood alone in the room. He muttered to himself about being an elite government worker and began to say something dismissive about Reito. The man who had been seated beside Shirori cut him off with clear anger and called his name. When Aizawa responded nervously, the man told him directly that adventurers were the people who went into dungeons to harvest magic stones and kept the world's energy supply running. They were people that everyone, including people like Aizawa, owed a debt of gratitude to. He told Aizawa firmly that he must never again speak of them the way he just had. Without adventurers, the work that Aizawa and people like him did would not be possible at all. The man gave him a firm pat and then told him to remain at home on standby until a decision had been made about what would be done regarding his actions. Later, at the dungeon, Karen came out looking thoroughly worn out and said she was exhausted. Reito observed that she had been noticeably more fired up than usual ever since the encounter with the boss. Karen replied that of course she had, because she wanted to grow stronger as quickly as possible and defeat the fourth-floor boss as soon as she could manage it. Then she noticed someone standing nearby. It was Sarawatari. Sarawatari pointed out that Harukaze had finally come back and told him in a flustered manner that there was someone waiting in the reception room who wanted to see him. She asked if he could stop by once he had finished settling his magic stone paperwork. Reito said he understood. He finished up and then made his way to the reception room and opened the door. Shirori was inside, and the moment she saw him, a look of profound relief crossed her face. She told him she had finally found him. She had been looking for him. Reito asked Kanzaki what had brought her there. Kanzaki responded with clear exasperation, asking what he meant by questioning why she was there. She told him he had no idea how desperately she had been searching for him, and said she never would have imagined finding him in a place like this. Reito apologized and admitted that he really should have contacted Kanzaki at the very least to let her know where he was. Karen was standing behind him, and Reito turned and introduced her to Kanzaki, explaining that Kanzaki was the submaster of the International Adventurers Guild and that she was not a bad person. He then turned back to Kanzaki and acknowledged that it had been a while since they had last seen each other. He mentioned that the last time they had spoken in person had been when he had been discussing retiring with her, and that she had tried to stop him from going through with it at the time. He asked whether it would be all right for Karen to join them for the conversation. Kanzaki said she did not mind at all and invited them both to sit down, saying they would have a proper and unhurried talk. Kanzaki began by addressing what had happened. She offered a formal apology on behalf of the guild for the actions of a man named Aizawa Katsuki, saying that even though their branches were different, they still all belonged to the same organization, and she felt responsible to address it. Reito asked who Aizawa was. Kanzaki was clearly taken aback by this, and asked how Reito could possibly not know, pointing out that Aizawa was the person who had forced him to retire. Reito thought about it, and realized he had simply never caught the man's name at the time. He told Kanzaki that yes, Aizawa had stolen his girlfriend, and he would not pretend he bore no grudge over that. But there was no reason for Kanzaki to apologize on his behalf. Reito admitted honestly that he had already been thinking about quitting adventuring around that time anyway. His former girlfriend had always resented the fact that he was an adventurer, and in the middle of that situation, Aizawa, a guild staff member, had shown up and the rest had followed naturally. In the end, both his former girlfriend and Reito himself had gotten what they each wanted out of the situation. He let out a short laugh as he said it. Kanzaki looked at him and remarked on how unervingly quickly he had moved past all of it, adding that he really had not changed at all. She then asked whether he would consider returning to being an adventurer. Reito said no immediately, telling her there was no way he was going back. He had finally managed to step away from it. Kanzaki sighed and said she had figured that would be his answer. Reito then added that it was also a moot point in another sense, because he had been placed on a blacklist and did not think he would be able to re-register even if he wanted to. Kanzaki stopped mid-sip of her tea and stood up abruptly. She asked him to repeat what he had said about a blacklist, demanding to know how something like that had even happened. She immediately assumed it had been Aizawa again. Reito told her it was not, and explained that it had simply been an acquaintance who worked as a receptionist at the branch. He asked Kanzaki to calm down because she was visibly alarming his companion. Kanzaki looked over at Karen, who was watching the whole thing with a hesitant expression, and immediately composed herself. She apologized for having shown such an unbecoming side of herself, and said she would start fresh. Kanzaki then offered a brief explanation for Karen's benefit. She told her that Reito was one of only 12 SSS-ranked adventurers in the entire world, a person known by the title 0. She added that Reito was also the only Japanese person ever to have reached the SSS rank, which effectively made him the single strongest adventurer in all of Japan. Karen sat there in stunned silence, absorbing this information. She then asked whether she should now be addressing him as Master Sama, or perhaps as Harukaze Sama. Reito told her to just keep calling him the way she always had. Kanzaki continued her explanation. She told them that all magic stones collected by adventurers around the world were centrally managed by the International Adventurers Guild and then distributed to individual countries as a source of energy, with each country receiving an amount proportional to what their adventurers had contributed. At present, roughly half of the entire world's magic stone energy supply was gathered by the 12 SSS-ranked adventurers combined. With Reito's retirement, Japan's share of that supply would inevitably shrink. However, she acknowledged clearly that they had no right whatsoever to force Reito to continue working against his own wishes. It was genuinely unfortunate, but they would make an official announcement stating that Reito had retired under good terms and on his own accord. Reito thanked her for handling it that way. Kanzaki added firmly, however, that regarding both Aizawa Katsuki and the employee at the Katsushika branch who had placed Reito on the blacklist, the guild would be taking proper disciplinary action against both of them. Reito said that was fine, but asked her to go easy on them. Kanzaki then turned her attention to Karen and mentioned that Karen had referred to Reito as Master a moment ago. Karen confirmed this and explained that she was Reito's disciple, or at least she was trying to be one. She had stood up without even realizing it as she answered, straightening herself instinctively. Kanzaki smiled warmly and said that to be chosen as Harukaze's disciple, Karen must be a genuinely promising talent. She told her that the Adventurers Guild would be watching her growth with great interest going forward. Karen responded with a firm and respectful yes. In Reito's own thoughts, he reflected on what had just happened. Just like that, his retirement had been officially recognized and approved. The announcement went out publicly that Zero had retired peacefully and on his own terms. A television broadcast shortly after covered the news, announcing that they would now be taking a closer look at the man behind Zero and what he had been doing since leaving his life as an adventurer behind. A conversation was taking place between a news anchor and a reporter about the legendary adventurer known as Zero. The anchor suggested that someone capable of taking down monsters in seconds was probably an enormous man, easily over 2 meters tall. The reporter pushed back and argued that perhaps Zero had relied more heavily on magic in combat, and personally imagined him as a lean, bookish type. The anchor laughed and said that if that were the case, it would be quite the stretch to imagine that Zero might actually live right next door to an ordinary person. Aizawa pointed the remote at the television and changed the channel. The new program was covering a popular new barbecue restaurant. Aizawa sat there looking visibly tense. Kaori asked him what was wrong and why he had changed the channel so suddenly. He stuttered and told her it was nothing. In his own mind, he was certain of one thing. He did not want to hear about Reito for even a single second. Aizawa then brought up something he had been meaning to address. He apologized for the suddenness of the transfer that had come through. Kaori responded gently, pointing out that Aichi was not exactly far away and that if she submitted a transfer request herself, she would be able to keep her job and go with him. So he had nothing to apologize for. Aizawa thanked her. Under the surface, he clenched his fist. He reminded himself that his cover story was holding together perfectly. The reality he had kept hidden was that he had received a triple blow of demotion, geographic transfer, and a 3-year pay reduction all at once. His salary had been cut in half. But with both of them working, they would manage. And being transferred to Aichi was not the worst outcome imaginable. He told himself quietly that Reito could wait, because someday Aizawa intended to claw his way back to the top. He invited Kaori to go out for lunch. She agreed, and he told her to get ready. As she turned back to the television for a moment before leaving, the host on screen was talking about the same restaurant that had just been featured, remarking that it was quite expensive. Kaori felt something shift in her memory. She recognized it. It was a restaurant that Reito used to take her to regularly. The host mentioned that the average cost per person was a staggering 100,000 yen. Kaori stood very still for a moment. She remembered Reito telling her it was an all-you-can-eat establishment, but she had never stopped to think about the actual price. Reito had always been the one paying, which meant she had simply never had any reason to know. Aizawa noticed she had gone quiet and asked what was wrong. Kaori told him it was nothing. But it was not nothing. A memory surfaced, unwelcome and sharp. She remembered what she had said to Reito on the night of the failed proposal. She had told him that their dates were always cheap and tasteless. She had told him she was sick and tired of them. She had snapped at him on what turned out to be one of the most important nights of his life. Standing there now, she began to wonder, for the first time, whether she had said something truly terrible to him. Meanwhile, at Reito's apartment, Karen was in her room, completely unable to make a decision. She was going back and forth between 2 outfit options, one casual and energetic and one more formal and mature looking. While she was still in the bath, she decided the only solution was to ask her master for his opinion. She sent him a photo of both options from her phone. Reito's phone buzzed. He looked at the message and photos and thought to himself that she still had not sorted this out. He called her back and told her that both looked good on her and she should just pick one and get ready. Karen replied that since it was a rare opportunity to meet his adventurer friends, she wanted to look her absolute best. Reito muttered to himself that it was just Karen being serious as always, and then offered a mild suggestion, guessing that the casual one might be the better choice, specifically the one with the large logo on the front. He told her that one would definitely go over well. Karen considered it and made her decision. She went with the casual outfit. She set the phone down on the towel beside the bath and let out a sigh. The nerves were already starting to get to her. Back in the other room, Reito glanced at the clock and noted to himself that she was still in the bath. Eventually, Karen emerged in her chosen outfit and told her master she was ready to go. Reito told her it looked good on her. Karen looked at him and pointed out that he was wearing what appeared to be his usual everyday outfit. Reito said proudly that it was just a casual meeting with the usual group, and besides, he was the kind of person who rotated between a selection of quality outfits rather than dressing up for specific occasions. They took the train to their destination. During the ride, Reito told Karen a little about the group they were going to see. He explained that the clan he had led was called the Twilight Tea Party. Since he had been the leader and had since retired, the clan had ended up disbanding after his departure. The remaining members had gone their separate ways, either forming new groups or starting entirely new clans of their own. He said they were all highly skilled and that he had no doubt they were doing well wherever they had ended up. Karen said she was starting to feel nervous. Reito told her to relax and assured her that they were all good people and that she would feel comfortable once she started talking to them. Karen took a breath and tried to settle herself. They arrived outside the meeting place. A sign on the door indicated the space had been reserved. Reito told her they were there and that they would head straight inside. When they arrived at the meeting place, Karen immediately recognized it. It was the Starry Sky restaurant, a place she had seen featured on television before. She knew it was an extremely popular establishment where people had to wait for hours just to get in, and that it did not accept reservations under any circumstances. Reito offered to explain how they had gotten in so easily. He told her that the Starry Sky restaurant was actually owned by a clan that had been subordinate to the Twilight Tea Party, meaning it was a business that belonged to his fellow adventurers. Karen murmured to herself that at this point her master seemed to be connected to everything impressive in one way or another. Reito laughed and told her that was not really how it worked. He then pushed open the door and invited her inside. A staff member welcomed them at the entrance and showed them the way in. When they entered the reserved area, everyone was already there waiting. A man wearing sunglasses and 2 women were present. The man, Sakai Guru, greeted Reito warmly and said they had all been waiting for him. One of the women, Maya Howard, said it had been a while since they had last seen each other. The other woman, Itano Naomi, who had served as the vice leader of the clan, said she had been searching for him. Reito greeted all of them and told them it had been too long, then asked how everyone had been doing. Guru said they had been fine, but pointed out that Reito's retirement had caused quite an uproar and wanted to know what that had all been about. Reito apologized for the trouble and said that a lot had happened in a short amount of time. Maya turned her attention to Karen and asked whether she was Reito's disciple. Karen replied awkwardly that yes, she was, and introduced herself. Maya immediately said Karen was very cute and asked how old she was. Karen told her she was 18. Maya became enthusiastic and said that meant Karen was already an adult and that they should drink together. Naomi stepped in and reminded Maya that Karen could not have alcohol until she turned 20 and told her not to put their guest in an uncomfortable position. Naomi then offered them seats and asked whether Reito and Karen were all right sitting on the opposite side of the table. From nearby, another woman made a soft sound of pleasant surprise and called Karen over toward her. She asked whether Karen was wearing clothing from her brand. She thanked Karen graciously for her patronage. Karen did not quite know how to respond. The woman was seated with an effortlessly elegant composure. Karen looked at her more closely and recognized her. It was Maria Evans, someone she had seen before in a magazine. Karen said shyly that they had only visited the Twilight MA store the other day. Reito said he had expected it would be a surprise for Karen to find out. Maria was a member of the Twilight Tea Party and had been managing the entire Twilight M group of businesses while simultaneously working as an adventurer. Karen suddenly understood why her master had suggested she choose that particular outfit. He had known Maria would be there and had pointed Karen toward her brand without saying so directly. Naomi called the table to attention and asked whether everyone had their drinks. She then stood to address the group. She acknowledged that the Twilight Tea Party had unfortunately been disbanded, and said that going forward, she hoped everyone present would forge their own new paths with confidence. She expressed her belief that every single person at that table was more than capable of thriving wherever life took them. She also noted that Reito had been found safe and had managed to take on a promising disciple. Maya cut her off at that point and said that was enough, which made Naomi pause and agree with a small smile. She cleared her throat and raised her glass. She proposed a toast to the Twilight Tea Party, and everyone lifted their glasses together. Later, as the group settled into their seats and the atmosphere relaxed, Goro brought up the story of Reito's failed marriage proposal. He said it was unfortunate how things had turned out. Reito responded lightly, saying that if a better man had come along then, there was nothing to be done about it. Goro told him not to let it weigh on him and laughed it off. Maya picked up on the fact that this meant Reito was now single and immediately began teasing Naomi about it, saying it was her chance. Naomi responded firmly that things between her and Reito were not like that, as she had already explained on more than one occasion. Maria raised her glass to her lips and took a sip with an air of complete and unhurried elegance. Karen watched her from across the table with quiet admiration. Reito noticed that Karen had been unusually quiet for some time and asked what was on her mind. Karen said that she had always thought of Reito as a capable and reliable adult figure, but seeing how he was treated here, almost like the youngest member of the group, had caught her off guard a little. Reito laughed and said that adventurers came from a wide range of ages and that even he was considered to be on the younger side within that world. He then pointed out that the clubhouse sandwich she had ordered had arrived in front of her. Karen thanked him and took a bite. She said it was incredibly good and remarked that it was exactly what she would expect from a restaurant that people lined up for hours to visit. Reito picked up another plate and mentioned that the cheese sandwich he had ordered was also excellent. He asked Karen whether she wanted to try a bite. Karen said yes and leaned over to try it. Across the table, Maya and Guru both noticed what had just happened. They looked at each other with knowing expressions. Maya asked in a hushed but playful tone whether they had just seen that. Guru said emphatically that he had. He asked out loud whether Reito and Karen were really just master and disciple, because what he had just witnessed looked like something else entirely. Reito asked flatly what else they could possibly be. Guru chuckled and said that no matter how a person looked at it, offering someone a bite of your food the way they had just done was something that only people in a romantic relationship tended to do. He mimicked the exchange in an exaggerated way and asked Maya whether she understood what he was getting at. Maya laughed and nodded along enthusiastically. Karen turned bright red at the word lovers being thrown around. She tried to insist that it was nothing like that. Before she could say much more, a waiter appeared behind her carrying a tray with draft beer, a smoked chicken sandwich, and a side of fries. The waiter lost his footing and slipped. Everything on the tray launched into the air. The members of the former Twilight Tea Party all reacted instantly. Goro caught the beer. Maya caught the sandwich. Naomi managed to catch the fries on the plate without a single one falling off. Every single item that had gone flying was caught before it could hit the ground. Karen turned to the waiter and apologized on his behalf, and the waiter apologized in return for the near accident. Goro broke the tension by calling out triumphantly, asking the table whether that had not been impressive. Karen agreed wholeheartedly, saying it had been genuinely amazing to watch. Those fast and precise movements were exactly the kind of thing she wanted to be able to do herself someday. Reito reached over and patted her on the head, telling her that she would definitely get there and that having him as her master was a good start. The three women at the table exchanged meaningful looks and watched the two of them with warm, knowing smiles. Reito noticed their expressions and asked what they were looking at. Goro said quickly that it was nothing at all. Later, as the gathering was winding down, Maya waved at Karen and told her that once she became a proper adventurer, the two of them should take on a dungeon together. Karen waved back enthusiastically and said of course, promising she would do her best to be ready for it. Reito mentioned that he had some matters to take care of after this and asked Karen to head home ahead of him. She agreed without any fuss. He gave a wave as he walked off in another direction. Karen made her way out, thinking to herself that the day had been a genuinely enjoyable one. Then she touched her cheeks with her fingertips, remembering the moment when Goro had used the word lovers to describe her and Reito. A warm smile spread across her face before she could stop it. She made her way to the train station shortly after. As she walked, something caught her attention. A woman was standing nearby, clearly in distress, crying quietly to herself. The woman was murmuring out loud, asking herself what she was supposed to do from now on. Her phone was in her hand, and she was repeating a name under her breath, Kori Shizuku, whispering for someone to please help her as the tears kept falling. Karen looked at the woman more carefully and recognized her uniform. She was a receptionist at the Adventurers Guild. Then the recognition clicked fully into place. This was the unpleasant woman from the very first time Karen had visited the dungeon, the one who had caused trouble for both her and Reito. Karen's first instinct was to simply turn around and walk away. But as she stood there watching the woman cry in her phone, something stirred in Karen's memory. She remembered a time when she herself had been desperately trying to call her parents, willing them to pick up, hoping with everything she had that someone would answer. The feeling of that came back to her clearly. Two men had noticed the crying woman and approached her, asking what was wrong in a tone that was not at all concerned. One of them laughed and made a cruel remark about the state of her makeup. Karen did not hesitate. She stepped forward and shoved her way past the two men, planting herself directly in front of the woman. She addressed her as the receptionist, saying it had been a while. The woman looked up and recognized Karen through her tears. Before she could say anything, Karen took hold of her hand and told her to come with her and explain what had happened. The two men called after them, but Karen paid no attention. They walked away together. They ended up in a nearby cafe. The woman was still sniffling and struggling to compose herself. She began to explain what had happened. When her superiors had discovered that she had placed Reito on the blacklist, she had been called aside by her boss. Her boss had confronted her with fury, telling her how she could have done something like that given the energy situation the country was facing. The only reason a lawsuit had been avoided at all was because Reito himself had chosen not to pursue one. Her boss had told her that what she had done was completely unforgivable, and that no matter how one looked at it, the situation called for disciplinary dismissal. She had been told to leave and never come back. Others around her had called her a criminal. She had panicked and run out of the building without knowing where she was going. Karen looked at her from across the cafe table. She said the woman's name, Shimizu Mizuki, and pointed out that when everything was stripped away, what had actually happened was that Mizuki had lost her current job. She asked gently whether that alone was really worth being this devastated over. Mizuki said that she had been a civil servant and that she was not naturally gifted academically. She asked Karen if she had any idea how hard she had worked to pass the civil service examination. Her father, her mother, her grandfather, and her grandmother had all been so proud and so happy when she had secured a stable government job through her own efforts. She said she could not bear to let down the expectations they had placed in her. Karen thought about what she had said and then responded. She told Mizuki that the people in her family were not actually happy simply because she had become a civil servant. What they had been happy about was the fact that her hard work had paid off. That was what had moved them. Mizuki went quiet and sat with that for a moment. Then Mizuki's phone buzzed. It was Shizuku calling back. Mizuki answered. Shizuku's voice came through in a rush, asking frantically what was wrong. She explained that after finishing work, she had checked her phone and found a large number of missed calls from Mizuki all at once. She told Mizuki she would come to wherever she was right away. Mizuki broke into fresh sobs at hearing her friend's voice. Karen sat across from her and sighed quietly. She told Mizuki that since things had already come this far, she might as well stay and wait. A girl entered the cafe and introduced herself as Ito Shizuku, Mizuki's friend. Karen told her they had been waiting for her. Ito apologized to Karen for having caused her trouble. Mizuki could hardly believe that Ito had actually come all the way there. Ito looked at Mizuki with a serious expression and asked what on earth she had been doing. Mizuki sobbed and apologized. Karen remarked quietly that it was hard to believe that just a few hours earlier she had been having such a good time, and now the day had taken such a completely different turn. Ito explained that when she had seen the sheer number of missed calls stacked up from Mizuki, she had tried calling back immediately. Seeing that Mizuki was being comforted by someone younger than herself, Ito asked for a brief explanation of what had happened. Mizuki told her that she had done something terrible to a person named Reito. Ito asked whether she meant Kaori's ex-boyfriend and whether Mizuki had actually encountered him. Mizuki explained that she had heard Reito had quit being an adventurer, but then he had shown up at the reception desk at her guild branch. Ito asked what had happened from there. Mizuki told her that she had put Reito on the blacklist. Ito stared at her in shock and demanded to know why she would do something like that. Mizuki explained her reasoning, saying that adventurers had a reputation for being rough and unpleasant people and that adventuring itself was widely regarded as a bottom-tier job. Everyone said so on social media, and Katsuki had said so as well, so she had simply believed it. Ito let out a long sigh and told Mizuki plainly that what had happened was 100% her fault. She then told Mizuki to listen carefully. She explained that adventurers were not all bad people, and that the job was far from being at the bottom of anything. The work that adventurers did provided the resources that everyone's daily lives depended on. It was a genuinely important and remarkable profession. Ito went on to point out that Mizuki had abused her position as a guild staff member by placing Reito on the blacklist. This was not the same as some harmless prank from their school days. Something like this had the potential to seriously damage a person's life and future. Mizuki was visibly shaken to hear it framed in those terms. She thought back to the moment she had done it, and realized that at the time, she had simply wanted Reito to move on and find what she considered a better job. It had never crossed her mind that her actions could actually ruin someone's life. Ito explained further that being placed on a blacklist could potentially leave a mark on a person's credit or trust records. If that caused problems in Reito's everyday life going forward, Ito asked Mizuki directly how she intended to take responsibility for it. She went through everything with Mizuki carefully and thoroughly. Mizuki said quietly that yes, she understood. She had done something that could not be undone or easily forgiven. Karen watched the two of them and smiled softly. She told Mizuki that she should feel grateful to have a friend who cared enough to sit down and scold her like that. Mizuki said out loud that she wanted to apologize to Reito properly. She then turned to Karen and apologized for asking something so soon after they had only just met, but she asked whether Karen might be able to get in touch with Reito on her behalf. Karen told her that was completely fine and stood up to make arrangements. Before leaving the cafe, Karen offered one more thought. She told Mizuki it was just a suggestion and that she might be overstepping, but if Mizuki was going to lose her current job regardless, why not consider becoming an adventurer? Both women looked at her in surprise. Karen said it was something she had learned from her master. Stability was not always an entirely positive thing. This could be an opportunity to aim for something higher. If Mizuki worked hard at it, the potential for growth and future achievement was greater than what a civil service career could offer. Mizuki was hesitant and uncertain, but Ito sat quietly with the idea for a moment, genuinely turning it over in her mind. Later, the three of them made their way to Reito's building. Mizuki looked around nervously as they walked down the hallway. She noticed that the flooring was marble and quietly worried out loud about what would happen if she scratched it. Ito told her that as long as she walked normally, it would be fine. She also remarked on how extraordinary a place Reito was living in. Karen smiled and said she had felt the same way the first time she had seen it. Karen opened the door and called inside to let Reito know she had brought people with her. Reito, who had already returned home ahead of her, asked in a surprised tone what was going on. He recalled that he had told Karen to head home before him, and now here she was arriving with guests he had not been expecting. Karen told him simply that a lot had happened on the way. Reito looked at the visitors and said it had been a while, recognizing one of them as the class president from his school days. Ito told him she had fully expected that he would have forgotten her by now. She also mentioned that she was not the class president anymore and told him to just call her Ito or Shizuku, whichever felt more natural. Reito invited them all to sit on the sofa and asked whether coffee would be all right as a drink. Before anyone could sit down or respond, Mizuki suddenly dropped to her knees on the floor in front of Reito. She pressed herself into a deep and trembling bow all the way to the ground and apologized in a voice full of genuine remorse. Reito, Karen, and Ito all froze in shock at the sight of it. Ito immediately called out Mizuki's name and moved toward her. Reito told Mizuki that she did not need to apologize because he had already been thinking about quitting adventuring on his own before any of this had happened. Mizuki struggled to find words in response and remained with her forehead pressed to the floor. Reito paused for a moment and then said that he understood what she was trying to express and that he accepted the sincerity behind it. However, he could not accept it as a proper apology in the way she intended. From the perspective of the wider world and society, what had been done was not the kind of thing that could simply be resolved with an apology and left behind. He gave her a concrete example to consider. If he had been a full-time D-rank adventurer with no other resources, someone who depended entirely on that income to survive, and he had suddenly been placed on a blacklist, what did she think would have happened to him? Through her unilateral decision, every path back to employment would have been completely cut off. With no real savings to fall back on, a person in that situation would likely have ended up with nothing, completely destitute and without any way forward. Mizuki clenched her fist as she took this in. Reito told her clearly that what she had done was serious. Mizuki admitted out loud that yes, she had done something genuinely awful. Reito told her that because of this, the matter could not simply end with an apology. What she needed to do was carry the weight of it with her, reflect on it properly, and live her life going forward in a way that ensured it would never happen again. Mizuki stuttered as she responded, but said with conviction that she would never forget it and swore that she would never do something so thoughtless again. Reito smiled at her. He said that if she truly understood that, then this part of the conversation was finished. Since she had come all this way, he told her to relax and take her time. Karen said she would go and make coffee for everyone. Ito knelt down beside Mizuki and told her quietly that she had done well. Mizuki looked up at her with a hopeful expression. Ito then told Mizuki that she had been turning something over in her mind for a while now and had come to a decision. She was going to quit her own job as well, and she wanted to know whether the two of them should become adventurers together. Mizuki was shocked to hear it. Ito explained that she had already reached her absolute limit at her current workplace. It was an environment filled with both power harassment and sexual harassment, and she had been enduring it for too long. Something about the day's events had made her want to aim for something bigger, to try her luck as an adventurer and see where it led. She turned to Reito and asked what he thought of the idea. Reito said it was a good one. He told them that if the two of them partnered up, their chemistry would probably make them an excellent team. He also offered to give them advice whenever they needed it. Ito turned back to Mizuki and told her that the two of them could go somewhere new, make a completely fresh start, and push forward together. She asked Mizuki directly whether the idea of becoming an adventurer was something she was opposed to. Mizuki said she was not opposed to it at all, and that if she was doing it alongside a friend, she felt like she could manage it. She leaned forward and hugged Ito. Ito told her not to cling to her like that, though there was warmth in the way she said it. Karen watched the two of them from where she stood and thought quietly to herself about what it meant to have friends like that. That night, after Mizuki and Ito had headed home, Reito thanked Karen for seeing them out. He acknowledged that it had been a rough and eventful day with a lot packed into it. He asked Karen whether she wanted another cup of coffee or whether it was getting close to dinner time. Karen sat down on the sofa and went quiet. Reito looked at her and then sat down beside her. He asked what was wrong and whether something had happened. Karen began to speak slowly. She said that throughout the day, watching the members of the Twilight Tea Party together, and then seeing Mizuki and Ito support each other the way they had, she had found herself thinking about how wonderful it was to have friends. And in thinking about it, she had ended up feeling a kind of jealousy she had not expected. Reito watched her quietly as she spoke. Karen continued, saying that when her parents had abandoned her, her first instinct had been to reach out to her friends for help. But she had stopped herself because she was afraid of becoming a burden to them. And before she knew it, her phone contract had run out and she had lost touch with all of them. She wondered now what they were all doing. Since they were in their third year of high school, they were probably deep into studying for university entrance exams. Reito asked her whether she had transferred the data from her old phone onto her new one. She had, so he suggested she simply try reaching out to them using her new number. Karen hesitated and said that since her phone number had changed, there was a chance they might not recognize it and ignore her message. Reito acknowledged that part was uncertain and out of her hands. He reached over and patted her head, then asked her to think back to the very first time the two of them had met. Back then, Karen had not hesitated to talk to a complete stranger sitting on a park bench. She had not stopped to worry about being ignored. He asked why reaching out to people she actually knew should feel any more daunting than that, and suggested she approach it a little more casually rather than building it up into something enormous in her mind. Karen took that in and said she understood. She agreed and told him she would try contacting them the next day. Then she said his name quietly and leaned her head gently against his shoulder. Reito asked what was wrong and whether she was feeling unwell. Karen told him that whenever she was going through something difficult, he always seemed to know exactly the right thing to say. Reito told her simply that he was her master. After all, Karen smiled at him. She told him she felt better now and thanked him. Reito felt warmth rise in his face and let out a quiet, slightly flustered laugh, saying he was glad to hear it. Karen straightened up and said she should get started on dinner. She announced that she was going to put everything she had into cooking again that evening.